So I think the best word that I could sum up the finale of Talk Up Destiny is satisfying. I mean, we've known that there is a game to this, right? And a lot of people walking into the show were saying, oh, it's just going to be an advertisement for the game. But that does it a great disservice. It'd be like saying every anime out there that adapts a manga is simply just a commercial for the manga, because most anime don't get a full adaptation, but it doesn't mean the team behind it isn't putting their all. And really, from fights to character moments to the usage of music, I love music, and I love it when an anime really incorporates it into its story. This was a satisfying show where it's interesting, right? Because the one criticism I might have had walking out of this episode is Sagan himself. And last week I mentioned in the video, I said something along the lines of, I'm going to wait and reserve my judgments until I see the finale, because it very well could fix any issue. Because what it was looking like was he was evil for the sake of being evil. And honestly, that's a little too comic booky for my liking at this point in time in anime watching. Interesting idea was that he was definitely wrong, and he was warped and clouded. And Talk in this episode even calls him out, saying like, you went to all these, like, you jumped through all these hoops and you didn't have to do that. Literally, music brings people together, and you could argue he could have just summoned all the D2s to a continent with no people and he could have done it. But it's interesting that, you know, the idea of losing so much and seeing how much he actually started out as a normal conductor, doing his best, just trying to help his people. And then when you see literally everyone die before your eyes and you see this crystal and you understand that you can summon D2s to it, it's not that his plan was right, but you understand that it wasn't just he wants to kill people, it's more of the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. In his mind, if he sacrifices a continent of people, he can save the rest of the world. He was wrong. But at the very least, it's not this one-dimensional reasons of just, oh, he didn't like people, so he got into the Symphonica. Actually apparently an organization that is there to help people, but just decided that he wanted to be evil. No, there was actually a path for his kind of corruption in his own mind, and Lost does a lot of heavy shit to any sort of person, and the idea of heaven and hell and the reason they stuck by him wasn't that they believed in his plan, but more so they just believed in him and wanted him to be happy, and that also kind of warped their own perception. Where you had someone like Destiny willing to do the exact same thing for Takt if he wanted that, but instead just Takt's idea of what he wanted to do just so happened to be less destructive than what Sagan wanted. So for me, that actually works quite well. I'm sure there'll be criticisms for it, that it's not deep enough or that his plan was flawed, but the fact that his plan was flawed is part of the story here, right? It's that when you lose that much and then the first thing that you see after dealing with that grief is something that's going to summon D2s, honestly, you're probably not all that well off in the mental psyche range at that point in time. And what I liked about him is they definitely had a very Guilty Crown-esque ending where the lover sacrifices herself so that the other lover kind of has a chance at getting saved. Because we know that as long as Destiny was around, she was draining Takt's life force. So basically, by letting go, it probably gave him enough time to get into that stasis pod. And what's interesting about it is that I heard that in the game that there's an Anna Destiny character, so it was always weird, I guess, for game players that Destiny was voiced by a different voice actor when Anna's voice actress was Anna, right? But now we see why. So basically, as Takt gets saved because Destiny lets go, basically kills herself in order to let go and let Takt have a chance at getting saved, he gets thrown into stasis, and in the process, we see Anna actually turn into her own version of Destiny, right? She trains under the Symphonica, and basically that gets to live on. So in theory, someday, years down the line, Takt will wake up, they'll probably save his life, and the story can go on as you could experience in the game. But as someone who has no interest in playing the game, who has no interest in seeing where the story goes from here, for me, this is a great stopping point. I like those Guilty Crown-esque endings because when you have a show like this, right, you knew both Takt and Destiny were not getting out of this one alive. Honestly, my money was more on actually Takt dying, but it makes sense because it's been established that the only reason that Destiny can continue to exist is because Takt's life force is fueling her. So if she lets go of that and basically kind of dissolves after this beautiful kiss scene, it should in theory give Takt a couple extra hours of life to hopefully be thrown into that stasis pod, which was established a few weeks back, that wouldn't save his life but would keep him going until maybe they could find a cure or something like that. So I think they did a great job at wrapping it up, giving enough answers, but it's not going to be some masterpiece of writing that, you're going to talk about 10 years down the line. But it doesn't change the fact that this was a damn good anime. The fight choreography was incredible. I thought this episode did a great job. I was actually expecting the fight to only last about 5 minutes, given this was the last episode, and also, you have so many different things you have to touch upon. How the hell are they going to have action past the 5-minute mark? Well, you separate Takt and Destiny, and that kind of explains it. Heaven and Hell's fusion after 2 to 3 weeks back, when she got absolutely annihilated by Destiny's incredible laser blast, and that fusion to turn them into such a cool creature, like from literally, there's been so many different stories I've seen this where like you had to kind of like obliterate the whole thing at once, otherwise it kind of just regenerates. It was really cool to see like how they pretty much blew from the stomach up, just she still could form back, but that gave him enough time to get and see Sagan. So it was really cool to see that, because this was definitely a man who, before the last couple of episodes, you would think is this giant mastermind manipulator, but really he was just a broken mind, very scared individual who didn't want to see other people get killed, and in return made a pretty warped decision of the needs of the many versus the needs of the few. Sometimes I think there definitely is room for that logic, the needs of the many versus the needs of the few, but when you can definitely, with not having lost thousands and thousands of lives before your eyes, you can make the argument he could have just summoned D2s elsewhere. And in return, by destroying that, you know, the Symphonicus is going to have more work to do, but I like the idea that the organization as a whole isn't bad, it's just it had bad apples at the top. So now that it's not there, hopefully they can now, you know, successfully take down the D2s without destroying civilization as they know it. And as we saw at the Christmas scene, I mean, it seems like they're definitely looking a lot better than they did, especially compared to just a couple episodes back. I mean, I really like this show. I think the characters across the board were interesting. Lenny definitely still steals the show for me. And I like his death. I think it served a purpose for sure. And the fact that, you know, the music arts can survive without their master. Like, that was something that was established for some time. But in the case of, you know, Caseus to Destiny and then Takt, I mean, that was an anomaly. That wasn't supposed to happen. And in return, the life force were basically linked together. So they definitely covered all the tracks that they needed to, in my opinion. I mean, the only thing after last week that was a little up in the air to me was where the crystal came from, and this episode with the backstory explains that. So for me, I don't really have loose ends. If people want to see more of the story, the game's out there and they can play it. I'm not sure if it's localized just yet, but it probably will be if it isn't just yet. And either way, it's a good stopping point where you can kind of like theory craft in your own mind where you might see it going in the future, or you can go see the game. But it doesn't just feel like an advertisement. It feels like it's its own story that links to another project, and that project I think is pretty good from what I've heard. So that just feels good to walk out of a show that I love since episode 1. Saw some really ridiculous community opinions arguing over Mappa versus Madhouse, and just like, I don't know, just the anime community wanting to be mad for the sake of being mad. But it turned into something that wasn't just pretty looking fights. It was, I mean, there was more dialogue moments than there were fights. And those dialogue moments were my absolute favorite parts of this story. And I really like seeing the relationship between Takt and Destiny and Anna kind of grow. And love is an interesting thing. Sometimes you don't even know you love a person until they're about to die. And at that point, they come back alive. Maybe you don't love them. But throwing him into a stasis pod, I mean, that's really going to further your love, saying, like, I'm going to do whatever it takes for both Destiny and Takt so that their dream lives on. And I wouldn't be surprised in the slightest after this point if Takt wakes up, if him and Anna Destiny did end up as a thing at that point. It would make complete sense. This is just a great show. I really, really enjoyed covering it, and I enjoyed talking with quite a few different people with different theories as well. It was really fun as well. But let me know your thoughts and feelings on the finale. You gonna go check out the game, or are you satisfied like myself with episode 12? Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.